And our lesson is from the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, just the first two verses. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. And let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. On this All Saints Sunday, we give thanks for those persons in our lives who have contributed to our faith journey. Often when we think of saints, we think of people who have done extraordinary things, like maybe persons who have left a lucrative job and moved to a developing country to set up a hospital or some hunger relief agency. And there are those kinds of saints, the kind of people who do remarkable things in their lives, so remarkable that they have things, buildings, places named after them. Cities like St. Louis, St. Paul, St. Augustine. Hospitals like St. Jude, founded by the late entertainer Danny Thomas. Universities like Gonzaga and DePaul and Loyola. And for those of us from Gen X, a favorite saint from our childhood was St. Joseph, whose name was explicitly tied to a children's aspirin. There are those kinds of saints, and then there is another kind of saint, an everyday saint, a person who's just simply trying to love God and love neighbor in ordinary, tangible ways. They may never have their images or portraits enshrined in stained glass. They may not have a wing of a hospital or an orphanage or a city or even a children's aspirin named after them, but they are saints nonetheless. There are saints gathered here in this sanctuary today. Marcia Jones, you are a saint. Eric Christman, you are a saint. Linda Fogelman, you are a saint. Jeff Kerr, you married a saint. Jeff is now texting the rest of the staff parish. There'll be an emergency meeting after the service. A saint is a person who has dedicated their lives to following Jesus, embodying his way, sharing his good news. And when you think of it that way, that means every person gathered here, if that describes your will and way in life, then you are a saint. There's a line in the Apostles' Creed that declares, "We believe in the communion of saints." In a few moments, we will celebrate the Lord's Supper, and the communion liturgy includes the phrase, "With all the company of heaven, we praise your name and join their unending hymn." All the company of heaven. It's an affirmation of our mystical union with all believers of Jesus, whether on earth or in heaven, both the living and the dead. The late Frederick Buechner wrote, "All the company of heaven." That phrase means everybody we ever loved and lost, including the ones we didn't know we loved until we lost them, and including the ones we didn't love at all. Usually we think of saints as heroic, pious, very serious people who have done extraordinary things. So extraordinary they had their names recorded in history books. But if you really get to know the saints, read about their lives, you will see firsthand that the saints were not what we would call very saintly. They didn't get everything right. In fact, they did a lot of things wrong. The saints did not live perfect lives. They lived very earthly, imperfect lives. Even the ones enshrined in stained glass lived very stained lives at times. And yet, despite this, they are called saints, because somewhere in the mix of the good and the bad, the imperfections and the grace, we see the love of God. There are saints whose names we know, who are well known. And then there are ordinary saints, just everyday people who follow Jesus and who try to impact other people's lives and their communities in ordinary ways. God gives the church this All Saints Sunday to remember people whose encounter with the risen Jesus have somehow impacted our lives. They have shaped our lives. People whose lives in response to Jesus are an example to us. Hebrews compares faith with a race, a challenge that is set before us. And any athlete knows that you just don't get to be good at the game by simply putting on a jersey or buying $200 tennis shoes and putting them on. You don't learn the game of tennis just by picking up the racket. No, somebody's got to teach you. You've got to be trained. You've got to submit yourself to someone else. Someone who wants you to be your best, who cares enough about you to correct you and teach you how to improve. The Christian faith is no different. We need mentors, spiritual guides to be an example for us, to show us how to get into the game of faith. Our lesson from Hebrews 12 begins with therefore. And in the Bible, that's an important word because it signals that something significant has been said and has been leading to an important conclusion that comes after that therefore. That therefore is an important word. That's what it's there for. And in the previous chapter, in chapter 11, the writer lists all kinds of people. He lists a kind of roll call of spiritual ancestors, a list of names of people from the Old Testament who were called and used by God according to God's good purposes. And these were very fragile saints with faults, and yet God used them. Hebrews says that these saints, these great cloud of witnesses, have set an example for us. They cheer us on as they surround the throne of God. The saints have passed the baton on to you. When you think about your life, your faith journey, you would not be a follower of Jesus were it not for someone who had gone ahead of you. When I was serving a church on the Outer Banks several years ago, sometimes our family would go to Jockey's Ridge, which is the largest natural sand dunes on the East Coast. And often it would take a bit of effort to scale those mountains of sand. But what made it a little bit easier were the countless footprints that were already on the dunes, indicating where someone else had walked before. It was a bit of an effort to try to make your own path, but it was just a little bit easier when you walked in someone else's footsteps. That's what the saints do for us. It was a bishop in Sweden who once said, "Saints are those who make it a little easier for us to believe in God." That's what the saints do. They show us the way. They point us to Christ. They walk in His way. And we who trudge behind them, sometimes confidently, sometimes haltingly, we walk in their footsteps too. The saints have made it just a little bit easier for us to follow Jesus. And so today we give thanks for all the saints who from their labors rest, and for all the saints who are gathered here today. Thanks be to God. Amen.